I got these going right across my deck here now. I did not right up in his vicinity, but no, I didn't. So this is good too. Roger. Thanks for that information, sir, and I'll get back to you if we come up with anything. Over.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name is Taylor, and I'll be one of your hosts today. Joining me, as always, will be Tanner here in just a couple moments. But before we get rolling into it, let's thank some patrons. We have Stephen, Brendan, Matthew, Jacob, Emily, and Andrew. Thank you very much for subscribing to the Patreon. Hope you enjoy that content. It's fun. It's a fun place that we get to put some kind of different things out there, get kind of creative with stuff. It's not always directly shipwreck related, but it is generally nautical. We appreciate you guys signing up for that and hope you enjoy it. With that out of the way, we'll go ahead and bring in Tanner. Tanner, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Good to be back, recording another episode.
How are things in Wisconsin?
Good. We're mostly moved in, so we're mostly settled. Things are all set up. Still a few little things we need. We find that we need like 2 more bookcases.
Just 2 more. It'll fix it all.
To slide in. Come on, bro. Just 2 more bookcases. Please, please. I promise just 2 more bookcases.
It is nice that you and your wife have the same hobby. You don't have to spend time like convincing each other that it's something you need. You're both like, yeah, we need this.
So yeah, that is good. That's convenient. We have wedged bookcases into almost every spot we can. On our landing, we have 3 of them going down to the basement because the IKEA makes a skinny version of the Billy.
A skinny Billy,
which wedges perfectly between 2 full-size ones. So yeah, we have most of the walls have books on them in some capacity, and we're just a little bit. There's part of our foreign language section that we don't have shelved right now because we just don't have any space for it.
I feel like you guys sound like an actual Barnes and Noble in the foreign language section.
Well, we kind of do. We have to sort of decide where we're going to shelve something. So like out in our living room right now, we have a shelf that is politics, political science, current event type stuff. And so we kind of had to make the decision spacing wise where to sort of draw the line. So we have anything related to like the modern Middle East or like Southwest Asia, North Africa out there with those. So like anything about Palestine, anything about Lebanon, Iraq, we have out there. And then in my room with the general nonfiction, we have anything on like Africa or South America. We kind of just had to make a dividing line between what is politics and what is history for us here.
Is that what's currently behind you that I see?
Yeah, this is nonfiction behind me. That is like the L's to M's. We're maximizing our space. Our house is not huge, but we do have a lot more usable space than we had in our apartment, which is really nice. Speaking of books, what are you reading?
I am reading a new book called Afghanistan. It's about the Russians in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989 by Roderick Brathwaite. I think it's a little bit of an older book.
I've heard of that one for sure.
I think it's kind of one of those that a lot of Afghanistan scholarship has like blossomed out of. Mm-hmm. So like I'm sure there are some things that are probably outdated or, thought about a little differently. But I think as far as a broad overview, I think this is where a lot of people start. It's interesting. A lot of it right now is still history of like, the Great Game. A lot of the English, the stuff the English are doing or, the United Kingdom is doing in Afghanistan and then Russia coming in there. We've just gotten to the part where the Russians are like fully intervening and, the paratroopers have come to secure the palace and stuff like that. It's interesting. I feel like I have a high level overview knowledge of the Russians in Afghanistan as far as like they deployed troops, on this date and this happened. But as far as like accounts from like on the ground of like what actually happened, I don't know a lot. This will be a pretty interesting look into it. It's interesting to see how in some ways it's so similar to our time in Afghanistan, but it also so different as well. There are some big differences.
The Soviet-Afghan War, I've never read extensively about it, but I do. One of the strategies that I have for picking up new vocabulary in like a specific, area is I will go to the Wikipedia page of a specific, topic, like a specific conflict or a specific person that will have a lot of that vocabulary, and I will read the Wikipedia page in whatever the target language is, so like usually Russian. As I go through, I'll pick up new vocabulary, and so because I did that with the Soviet-Afghan War, that's where I picked up how to say things like, shoulder-fired missile, or firefight, or suffocation because of the Salang Tunnel fire. So yeah, I have somewhat of a knowledge of just the general scope of the war, but yeah, I've never really read extensively about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting further into that.
I have the book Zinky Boys, but I haven't read it.
I know if this one goes well, that may be my next read. What about you? What have you been reading? Some lighter stuff, or maybe not?
Not really. I did actually just finish reading yesterday. I just finished reading The Souls of Black Folk by Du Bois. I had read a couple essays out of it before, but this is my first time just reading it cover to cover. I do have Black Reconstruction in America by him also, which is a lot more of a project. I might jump into that soon. But the best thing I'm reading right now is Volume 1 of a 3-part series by the Brazilian journalist Laurentino Gomes. The series is just called Escravidão, slavery. And it's the first of a 3-part series covering slavery in the chattel sense of slavery, like the transatlantic slave trade sense of slavery, with a focus on Portugal and then primarily Brazil in the second part of the series.
I don't feel like the Portuguese always get enough credit.
Well, they don't, and like naturally, that's a corollary from the fact that it is such a big part of Brazil. But to that point, in the first few chapters of the book, he like does a very quick overview of slavery in the ancient world, the Romans, the Greeks. It's sort of just say, yes, it did exist. However, when people say, well, slavery has always existed, yes and no, not in the same sense, not in the racialized sense that it becomes with the transatlantic slave trade or with the African slave trade.
I feel like also just like how basically industrialized the trade becomes. Like,
exactly,
they're shipping up like people as if they're a commodity.
Right, there are massive differences in those systems.
There's like no earning your freedom like there is for a Roman slave potentially.
There's that racial aspect. You're born into this. The assumed state of an African person at this time is slavery. But to your point about Portugal, even literally pre-Brazil, before Portugal knows about or is in Brazil, the slave trade to Portugal is huge. Foreigners, diplomats who visit Portugal, one of the things they comment on is everybody has a slave in Portugal. Like the king has slaves, the poorest person you can meet on the street probably has a slave, because the supply of them is so huge.
The Confederacy would have loved Portugal,
to the point where a slave is not even really considered something of value. It's a tool, an implement that everybody has one of these. And yes, like the slave trade to Portugal, even before the slave trade goes transatlantic, is huge. Thousands and thousands of slaves are brought to Portugal and sold, before our conception of, the triangle trade, the transatlantic slave trade, which I had never really known about. I knew that, obviously there had been slave auctions in Portugal in like the late 1400s, but the scale of it was a surprise to me. Kind of like when we talked about the slave trade to Brazil. When you look at that in comparison with the slave trade to other parts of the Americas, and Brazil absolutely dwarfs all those other places in terms of numbers. You have, I think, like 5 million slaves being brought directly to Brazil out of like 12 million total. So yeah, I'm really excited. He's a very good, very lively writer. I'm reading it in Portuguese, so again, there's like the occasional stumble where like I'll confuse a word for like a Spanish word that looks the same, and I'll be really confused for a second, and then I'll figure it out. It's very good. He has another series. He has a 3-part series on key moments in the history of Brazil. I have the first one because I found it at Half Price Books, shelved with the Spanish books, of course, but in Portuguese. The first one's called 1808, I believe. It's talking about that when the Portuguese monarchy is in exile during the Napoleonic Wars, and so they go to Brazil, and that basically becomes the capital of the Portuguese Empire.
Yeah, I remember talking about that, how weird it is that the colonial capital is essentially the capital.
Yeah, like the metropolitan shift, I think, is the term for that, where it switches and, sort of Portugal is an outside branch of the empire for a time, and Brazil is where the actual empire is headed. So yeah, that's what I've been reading lately. Speaking of media, one thing to remind people of, we posted about this yesterday. We were able to go onto the podcast We Always Lie to Strangers, who our listeners will recognize from their guest appearance on the I-40 bridge collapse episode we did a couple weeks ago. We went on to their show to cover a non-ship related story, which was fine. We love we'll podcast about anything. This was about the 1953 Springfield, Missouri Cobra Scare, which was not a story I had ever heard before.
I hadn't either.
I know it's been covered like a few other places, but yeah, I had never heard of it. It was a very fun episode. I listened back to it yesterday. We were talking about how in the moment when you're recording especially I think a guest podcast, you kind of don't always get all the details of the story because you're trying to think of how can I contribute to this episode?
Right. React to everything.
And so listening back to it yesterday, you're really getting a better sense of the whole story. It's a really fun story. It's a really fun episode. So I highly recommend you can start with that one if it makes you feel safer listening to a new podcast maybe, but definitely go back and listen to all of their episodes.
Yeah, they have a lot of fun stuff.
They have a huge variety of episodes and they're all really cool. A lot of very, very deep cut lore and history of the Ozarks. It's kind of like what they go for is, stuff that you probably have not heard about other places. They're one of my favorite podcasts. Go check them out.
With all of that taken care of, I guess it's time to talk about a shipwreck now. Today, we're going to take a journey into history. We're going to take a journey to when World War II just started.
Oh, like in Poland?
No, later than that. December 7th, 1941.
Like when the real war just started.
Like when the real war. Yeah, it's when the real World War II just started.
The last time we made a reference to that, and I did the sound drop and everything, we had a comment from, I think it was a British person. It seemed very British, the comment. It was like, oh, dearie me. I don't even know where to start with this one. About how, us referring to World War II just starting on December 7th. And, I feel like a general rule is, if you listen to a podcast and they say something that sounds strange, but they have a devoted sound drop that's clearly for it, it's probably an inside joke. And you should probably maybe listen to other episodes of the podcast, or at very least, withhold your comment until you know what's going on.
I think we've also covered multiple stories that take place before 1941 and World War II.
That's true. But again, you'd have to listen to the podcast to know that. People are so impatient to get in on the jokes.
You gotta earn the jokes.
You gotta put the time in. Yeah.
So let's dig a little deeper into December 7th, 1941, the beginning of the war here. What do you know about the USS Oklahoma?
I know it's a little Ozark connection. A little bit of Oklahoma's in the Ozarks.
You know what? That wasn't even intentional. That was...
The only other thing is I know she was at Pearl Harbor during Pearl Harbor.
During the harboring?
During the harboring of Pearl.
The main image I think of, when I think of Pearl Harbor in my head, I think it's the famous picture of the Oklahoma capsized with her hull, sticking out of the water. To me, that's one of the first pictures I think of.
Something we were talking about before the episode. I think one of the reasons that I don't really know much about the Oklahoma is I saw that picture and I thought that was the Arizona. I always I would have guessed that picture was a picture of the Arizona. After having read this story, I know that there's not much of the Arizona to take pictures of.
Yeah, that is one of the things that the Arizona is easily the most famous ship that's at Pearl Harbor that day. like when you visit Pearl Harbor, a lot of it is geared around the Arizona and going out to visit that site.
This could be getting ahead of us, but to your knowledge, was the Arizona necessarily more famous than any other ship there before, or is it just because she exploded?
Just because of the devastating explosion that took place. No, like she no more famous than anything else. Just a regular Pennsylvania class.
Right.
There's going to be so many different classes of battleships in this story because this was the time when like every class had one or two vessels and they built a different class that was slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, trying to stay under the Washington Naval Treaty limits and things like that.
We should do a bonus just on the Washington.
Read through our line by line.
Yeah.
So the Oklahoma is part of the Nevada class of battleships. This class would only consist of 2 vessels. At the same time, like we just said, there's a lot of different projects going on with the Pennsylvania class, New Mexico, and Tennessee classes, all being built between 1912 and 1920.
So was the other Nevada class battleship the Nevada?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I'm pretty sure the Nevada was also there on Pearl Harbor.
She was. I remember that from a secret account that we will bring up later that we don't know that I've read yet.
I think what's interesting is like all of these are like pre-dreadnought, or not pre-dreadnought. They're all dreadnought style battleships.
Mm-hmm.
You're not seeing like the fast battleships that you're going to see from like the North Carolina class and later like the Iowa class.
Well, that's actually that's one kind of surprising thing I remember from reading like the Ian Toll trilogy is some of the pictures from Pearl Harbor is like in my head when I think of a battleship, I think of I guess like an Iowa class battleship with those specific lines and contours. And most of the battleships that are at Pearl for this deck, it's amazing when you see pictures of them before how old they look.
Yeah, I mean, you even compare them to the way that like the North Carolina looks. And, the North Carolina is one of like, I don't know if it's the first fast battleship technically. I think it might have been, that class might have been the first for the US at least. And it looks like what you'd think a battleship looks like in World War II. It's sleeker, it's slimmer. A lot of the dreadnought style vessels do look old. And I think that's, interesting as we get through it, we'll see that that's mostly what's at Pearl Harbor. So as we said, the Nevada class are a standard type battleship, and they're actually really one of the first in the U.S. Navy. So it's old even by like dreadnought standards in the U.S. Navy. They're designed to have long-range gunnery, speed, and a turning radius that allows them to operate cohesively with the fleet. That's kind of their goal. They're not supposed to necessarily operate independently. Like it's all working together within a larger, fleet, actually. On the technical side of things, the armor that we're going to work with here, armor on a ship there's like a lot of different methodologies there that the less armor you have, the faster you are. So if you can outrun a fight, you don't have to worry about armor necessarily. If the vessel's slower, then you're probably armored up. So what they try to do here is split the difference, basically. You're going to put extra armor in vital areas, and then in non-critical areas, there might be no armor. So you're kind of trying to maximize your speed, but still be armored in the places where you need it. This would allow for thicker armor in key locations like main turrets, belts, and magazines, things like that. Things that you don't want to go boom. Another bit of kind of more modern technology is she has oil-fired boilers. And the Nevada is the first U.S. battleship to use this, actually.
As opposed to coal?
Coal. This allows for a longer range than coal, essentially. It's more efficient. It burns more efficiently. It puts out more energy. What I thought was kind of weird is that she has triple expansion engines. And I don't know a ton about this stuff, the engineering side of things. But the Nevada, the USS Nevada, is equipped with a steam turbine, which would be modern at the time. Whereas the Oklahoma has this triple expansion, which is old. Like that's the type of engine setup that like the Titanic would have had.
Yeah, that's what I think of with like old like steamships.
Or just, ships are trying to build cheaply. I think a lot of the Liberty ships and stuff, I believe, use like a triple expansion type setup. Here, maybe money became a problem and you had to do this, but it's just odd that you'd have the modern oil-fired boilers but then set it up with an older engine.
Yeah.
But who knows? It's government work. There's probably contracts and stuff. So specifications, this was as she was built. She'd be overhauled multiple times throughout her life. So some of these numbers would change a little bit. But she's 583 feet long. She had a 95-foot 6-inch beam with a draft of 26 feet 6 inches. She's a wide vessel. Maximum speed of 20.5 knots and a range of about 8,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. So she could go. Let's move on to the fun part for a battleship, the armament. Main guns were 10 14-inch guns mounted in 2 triple and 2 twin turret designs. I always like that with battleships before things get standardized, like seeing the way the different ways that the guns are configured. And essentially what you have here is you've got 5 guns in the forward section and 5 guns on the aft section. So 2 and 3 on each side. For her secondary guns, she originally had 21 5-inch guns for defense against destroyers, torpedo boats, things like that. And this would later be reduced to 12. And I think some of that, you might be wondering, like, well, why did we reduce it? I think some of that is to equip more anti-aircraft weaponry, as it becomes apparent throughout this vessel's life that airplanes are in fact very bad for ships.
Well, yeah, and like the fact that, like, I don't know, I'm obviously not for the Oklahoma herself, but for other battleships later in the war, it's like the chances of, Japanese destroyers or torpedo boats being in range of those guns is very, very low. Whereas the chance of Japanese planes being in range of those anti-aircraft guns is extremely high.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got things like Billy Mitchell doing his big experiment in, I think, 1921, where he sinks a bunch of ships and proves that like air power can, be a problem for a navy. So literally, like, as this ship's life is happening, like major advances are happening, and you've got to change around that armament to make it work, basically.
And that's why we named an airport after him.
Right. She also did have a couple of torpedo tubes. I think that's always something interesting. Is you don't think about like a battleship like launching torpedoes, but it could.
Yeah, I think of submarines and destroyers launching torpedoes.
But she did have 2 21-inch torpedo tubes.
A couple weeks ago, we went to the Manitowoc, the Maritime Museum, the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. It was mostly us from the office and then one of our students, because we only had one student at that time. So we went there, and this is the first time going there that there was no guided tour available for the USS Cobra, the submarine.
Did you have to step up and take the reins?
Well, sort of. So like they do have like things where you can just kind of do the self-guided tour. But when we got on there, they do have like volunteers who are like, posted up on there. Some of whom are like older, veterans who maybe served on submarines. Not that submarine, because they would be like 110 at this point. They served on the Cobra. But they also have some, younger volunteers who just are very knowledgeable about the ship. And this is the first time being there that the torpedo tubes, someone was there to actually demonstrate how they worked. It was really cool getting to see an active demonstration of, flooding the tubes and all the stuff that goes into actually launching a torpedo.
So they actually like flooded the tubes and everything?
Well, no, but they have like the handles marked and they showed the process. And then,
nice.
Although the submarine, I think they said is like, it's like 70-80% functional.
like in theory you could fix it.
Right. So like they have stuff marked like do not touch, like this lever. So we don't want to launch a torpedo at the USS Badger as it's coming into dock in Manitowoc.
So another thing that you don't always think about on a battleship is aircraft. 3 float planes were assigned to the Oklahoma. These are normally Vought VE9 biplanes. It's a variant of the VE7 for all of our airplane people out there.
No. Fly plane, not float plane. Fly.
They look like what you'd expect, like for an interwar biplane to look like a seaplane. They're nothing fancy. They're slow. They're not for fighting. They're primarily used for spotting and recon. You have to find the enemy fleet to destroy the enemy fleet. And I think reading through like Ian Tull and stuff, it's amazing how much time is just spent trying to locate the other fleets and knowing who's where.
locating and then like the timing of it, if you locate the fleet on your way out and are able to circle back versus like if the other guys are like coming back on their recon routes and they sight your fleet, and then who can get back and who can relay that message and who can launch their bombers first. Like it's all about the timing of it, and how like the Battle of Midway could have gone very, very different, just because of a minute or two difference in timing.
Yeah, I mean these are essentially the radar of these vessels. Like there is no radar at when she's launched. That this is the only way you're getting information. So let's dig into the construction and commissioning. Her keel was laid on October 26, 1912, by New York Shipbuilding Corporation. They bid just under $6 million to construct the vessel. Isn't it wild? $6 million could buy you a whole battleship in 1912. She'd be launched March 23rd, 1914, sponsored by Lorena J. Cruz, who was the daughter of Governor Lee Cruz of Oklahoma. I thought it was interesting. There was an invocation held at launch. That's very Oklahoma coded.
I was going to say, I bet the governor of Oklahoma in 1914 is probably not a nice guy.
It's led by Elijah Embry Haas.
Big Haas.
And this is actually the first time in 50 years that there was an invocation at the launching of a naval vessel. This was a unique thing.
That's good, at least, I guess.
I read Elijah's wiki hoping to find something funny, but by all accounts, he appears to be a very dedicated and educated guy. And this is the only bad thing I could find is he was a bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And if you're wondering why there's a comma and then South at the end.
Is it the same reason that there's a Southern Baptist?
Yeah, okay. That's why. Okay. Because in 1861, they split away from some friends.
Yep. Okay.
Over states' rights.
One specific state's right.
So I spent way too much time reading about the Methodist schism that happened in the U.S. just before the Civil War. Like I said, you'll never guess why they split. That's all I could find about him, though. He overall seems to be a pretty upstanding citizen.
Okay.
On July 15th, 1915, while still under construction, a fire was noticed under the 4 main battery turret. And what's interesting is not necessarily the fire itself, because it was handled without any major damage. It's just that this is the 3rd such fire that had happened on an American battleship in that month. That's definitely a little suspicious.
In this era of like, this is, like swirling rumors of German saboteurs.
Mm-hmm.
Although this is, prior to the U.S. entry in the war, but still.
There's obviously talk of sabotage. Nothing concrete was found, though. By July 22nd, the Navy says that the fire was caused by faulty insulation or a mistake by a dockyard worker. Sort of feels like that maybe there was some sabotage and the Navy was just like, no sabotage here. Don't worry about it.
It was certainly not caused by sabotage.
This worker, this one here, he doesn't know what he's doing. So the incident would set her behind schedule, but work would quickly resume. This resulted in her being commissioned on May 2nd, 1916. She's under the command of Captain Roger Wells.
I wonder if there's any relation to Gideon Wells.
He is related to some people, I believe. No, is this the one? No, I don't know if he is. Nope, I don't think this is the guy. There's another captain who definitely has some familial connections. Wells is a career Navy man who started out as an ensign who surveyed Alaska and studied her native peoples and culture. Kind of interesting when the Navy was doing those kind of things.
Maybe a little connection to our next episode.
He'd rise through the ranks, eventually leading the Office of Naval Intelligence as a rear admiral. He'd end his career in 1926 at the mandatory age of 64. However, he would live until 1932, when he died of a heart attack in New York City. But wait, what was that? Did you say you wanted to know what his birthday was? December 7th, 1862.
Yes, there are only 365 options for birth dates. 366, I guess, some years. So, yes, spooky a little bit, but could just be coincidence.
Definitely had to. I was reading through. I'm like, well, that has to go in there. So yes, her first captain's birthday was December 7th.
All right.
So she's built. It's 1916. What's going on in the world in 1916? Are we doing anything?
I mean, we're not really, but people are. Stuff is happening.
Stuff is happening. Soon we will be doing something. Immediately post-commissioning, the Oklahoma toured various Navy yards on the East Coast, and she focused on crew training. This would go on for a while, and eventually, America decides, hey, we do want to get into this World War I, if you will, the first time. It's somewhat ironic that her oil-fired engines or boilers actually proved to be a detriment to her at first. And this is due to the fact that the German U-boats had so effectively choked off the oil supply to Great Britain that she couldn't reliably be refueled there. So she's essentially stuck on the East Coast because she can't use coal. Coal the British have.
Right.
Thanks, Newcastle. So as a result, she's not able to join Task Force Battleship Division 9, and that's meant to support the Grand Fleet in the North Atlantic. As we all know, the naval campaign in World War I, for the most part, is just a bunch of playing chicken with each other. But that's the design. The idea here is that this task force would go assist the British fleet.
It's like playing chicken, and then one time you both accidentally hit each other in the face, and then you sort of back up again. It's like, well, I don't want to do that again.
So in order to keep sailors engaged as they were not in the fight, there's a variety of athletic teams that were created for sports such as baseball, boxing, rowing, things like that.
Oh, well, thanks, boys. That really helps the war effort.
I think that's something that kind of carried over definitely into the pre-World War II days. Because I know at Pearl Harbor, there was a pretty big exhibit on athletic teams and stuff that the different vessels would have. And there would be full on brackets and competitions at Pearl Harbor for baseball, boxing, wrestling, all these things. And there was a lot of ship pride tied up in that.
The baseball thing reminds me of, I've been on a little bit more of a baseball history kick the last couple months. And one of those, one that I actually used in class, kind of tie in with our field trip to the Brewers game against the Dodgers, was about the history of baseball in Japan. And that history is really interesting because that's a piece of American culture that was really latched onto by the Japanese in the late early 1900s. It became such a huge popular sport. So like Babe Ruth, he visited Japan and he was really instrumental in making the professional game a thing in Japan because it was an amateur thing. And he sort of shows up and does a lot of promotion for it, of making this something that's it's acceptable. It's okay to play this game professionally. So yeah, Babe Ruth is a huge hero in Japan. And then, later around wartime, you hear stories of, the Japanese soldiers taunting U.S. troops, not cursing Roosevelt, not cursing the Statue of Liberty, but cursing Babe Ruth as the way. Oh, this will really get under the American skin.
In August of 1918, Oklahoma is finally assigned to Battleship Division 6. This is under the command of Rear Admiral Thomas S. Rogers. So as the war progresses, obviously, the tide begins to turn against Germany. Some of the supply lines do open up. So she's finally being able to get some use in August of 1918. So this is really towards the end.
Right.
So a little bit more about Rear Admiral Thomas S. Rogers. This is the man with some connections.
Okay.
Rogers' great uncle was Commodore John Rogers, who commanded forces in the First Barbary War. And his maternal great-grandfather was Captain Christopher Raymond Perry, who fought in the Quasi-War, and was the father of Oliver Hazard Perry.
Oh, I knew I recognized the Perry name.
So,
wait,
yes.
So would that also make him the father of Matthew Perry?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this man comes with connections. Like he's got a like if there's not a lot of like blue blood U.S. Navy people, but like this man would be one of them.
Oh, I could probably read about his great uncle Commodore John Rogers in the Brian Kilmeade book on Thomas Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates.
You probably could. There's probably a more factual option out there.
This may be a better place you could read about it.
Oklahoma would be joined by her sister ship Nevada on August 23rd, 1918, and they met up with a group of destroyers about 300 miles west of the Irish coast. From there, they would steam to, is it Berehaven? Berehaven, I guess, since it's Ireland.
I'm guessing Berehaven.
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 I know. I don't know why I decided to go.
It does kind of look like Bremerhaven, like in Germany.
That's what the Germans intended on calling it eventually. In Berehaven, they would wait 18 days for the battleship Utah, which was a Florida-class vessel. So they're kind of waiting for everyone to link up here, form the task force. Fortunately for the crew, I guess, or unfortunately, depending on how you viewed it, the time in Ireland's pretty uneventful. This is late in the war. There's not a whole lot going on. The task force is actually only called out once in an 80-day period. A majority of their time is spent escorting troop ships or drilling while at anchor or in nearby Bantry Bay. So it's a pretty boring time. Like they're just doing the same things they were doing on the East Coast, but now they're doing it in Ireland. And I guess
that's
technically
cool.
They're in theater. But another interesting thing I came across here is that the vessel's crew played multiple games of American football, which apparently the Irish found pretty amusing.
I imagine.
It's another example of like those teams that I was talking about. That like every battleship had a football team.
Like these Americans don't know how to play rugby at all.
No, I don't know though. 1918 football is probably a lot more like rugby than.
Has the forward pass been legalized by this point in American football?
I can't remember. I don't know. There's probably why do they stop so many times between each scrum? So the biggest enemy that the crew would face anytime, it's like lions led by donkeys. Says anytime you get you and thousands of your homies together in one place, disease. The crew is faced with a flu pandemic in 1918, which would claim 6 sailors. Literally, the most dangerous thing you can do on this ship is just exist and catch the flu.
Is this part of the flu, the big flu pandemic?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is wrapped up in World War I pretty solidly. That, like, you've got all these people from different places concentrating in one place and sharing all their germs. Leave that sneeze in.
Mm-hmm.
In November,
it's allergies.
In November 1918, essentially the end of World War I, some members of the Oklahoma get into a little altercation while they're on shore. This would involve a couple local groups of Sinn Féin.
Okay.
And would ultimately lead to the captain of Oklahoma issuing an apology to 2 local mayors. So I'm not sure what kind of trouble they got into.
Like apologizing for fighting with Sinn Féin?
Yeah, basically like apologizing for starting issues. Oklahoma left for the Isle of Portland on November 26th, where she would be joined a few days later by the USS Arizona and the USS Nevada. It is weird. This was like a little bit of a blind spot for me, I guess. It's weird seeing the Arizona exist outside of the context of Pearl Harbor.
Right.
I feel like it's been such a like, I don't mean myth as in fictitious, but there's such like a mythology has been built up around it.
She's so tied to one specific place under the water at Pearl Harbor.
So the battleships are actually given the task of escorting the liner SS George Washington, which was carrying Woodrow Wilson. That's kind of cool. That's kind of how she ends her World War I service.
Did the George Washington have a theater where Woodrow Wilson could watch Birth of a Nation?
I'm sure they did. They had the director's cut ready to go for him. So kind of moving on here to the interwar years, this decade and a half where nothing happens, but so much happens. On December 14th, she would set sail for New York. She spent a majority of the winter of 1919 conducting battle drills off the coast of Cuba. So she comes back east, refits in New York, and then, I wouldn't mind spending my winter off the coast of Cuba. That sounds all right. Oklahoma would again venture to Europe, and this is also The notes say while exciting President Wilson. I'm sure he enjoyed his time. They were actually escorting President Wilson, however. He was only excited when he was watching Birth of a Nation. They would depart on June 15th and return to New York on July 8th. It's interesting here, she's still a relatively modern vessel. She's getting to do the fun stuff. Like, you don't really send an old clunker to go escort the president. You're sending, the best of what you have. For the next 2 years, Oklahoma was assigned to the Atlantic Fleet. While serving there, she undergoes a couple different overhauls. This is when her secondary battery gets reduced from 20 to 12 5-inch guns. And you can also see aircraft are becoming more of a threat, right? Like, we're learning more stuff. We're growing, we're learning, we're listening. The early months of 1921 found the Oklahoma venturing to the South America coast, the West Coast to be exact. This is part of a larger joint exercise with the American Pacific Fleet. And in 1925, she was actually assigned to Pacific Fleet.
Like a play date to see, and then she can go hang out with them.
We can see here that it looks like Europe's settling down, but there's some rising tension in the Pacific, starting to shift some assets around, that kind of thing. So she would depart San Francisco on April 15th and arrive off of the coast of Hawaii on April 27th. While off the coast of Hawaii, she would take part in various war games. With war games completed, she would travel her way to Samoa and then on to Australia, where she would conduct further training exercises.
Whoever serves as the football coach on board is just wildly impressed with the Samoans' natural talent for American football.
Y'all want to join the Navy?
We need a hard-hitting roving free safety. Do you have one of those?
Let's see. While she's in the neighborhood, they would go ahead and visit Peter Jackson's Middle Earth before making their way back to the United States. I'm sure they enjoyed their time in New Zealand. In 1927, she would transit the Panama Canal, and this is where she would join something called the Scouting Fleet. Have you heard of that term?
Looking for young, up-and-coming ship talent?
Have you heard of the Scouting Fleet?
What does the Scouting Fleet do?
So I think I only briefly read about it. Essentially what it sounds like is eventually we realized we need more than just like a Pacific Navy and an Atlantic Navy. And the Scouting Fleet was sort of something that could be moved between the two or to wherever it needed to be, essentially.
Okay.
And it would carry out like first recon, first evaluations. Like, it almost sounds like a like what you would modern day call like a rapid response,
like
force,
a sort of
something.
Like Vanguard type thing you'd send in before you decide what else needs to get.
Yeah, like it was like a fleet that was able to respond to things where needed, essentially. So November 27th found the Oklahoma at the Philadelphia Navy Yard undergoing more overhauls. As you can see, like there's been like 3 or 4 already. Like, they're constantly doing stuff to this vessel. And some of that is because the technology is just changing so quickly. Like I said, there's so many different classes of battleships being made, and there's all these little tweaks happening and, changes in emphasis. It's really interesting. Part of this overhaul, though, like, this is pretty substantial. They actually add 8 modern 5-inch guns. So they replace some of those 5-inch guns that were left. I thought this was interesting. The main battery turret elevation is raised from 15 to 30 degrees. So a little broader range in targeting with the big guns there. A second aircraft catapult is installed. So now you're able to put out, twice as many aircraft. 2 inches of deck armor is added. See, and then I think it's in 1927, her armor is upgraded and a torpedo bulge is added. So do you know the concept of a torpedo bulge?
I feel like I've heard the term. I don't know what it's for.
So like essentially, like in modern times, what you could almost compare it to is, you see like the Russian T-72s that have all the cages and shit around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so the drone explodes on contact with the cage rather than the tank.
Right.
It's sort of the same thing, that this bulge would protect the hull. that if a torpedo hits it, it hits
it's
the bulge.
I was thinking it was like a bulge around the area where they fired the torpedoes.
No, this is like a defensive measure, so that
I see.
That it hits the bulge rather than the hull. So even if you put a hole in the bulge, there's not a hull in your hull.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead and piece that out, non-native English speakers.
Right. Okay, I get it. I get the point of the bulge.
Is that a bulge on your ship? Or
torpedo bulge.
So these improvements resulted in the Oklahoma being the widest vessel in the Navy.
Hey, that's
with a beam
something.
of 108 feet. She's a thick girl. It also reduces her speed to just under 20 knots. So she's slowing down with her age, getting a little bigger. It happens, but she's still effective.
What if I told her that the next time she's in combat, her speed is not going to matter at all?
Oklahoma would join the scouting fleet in the Caribbean before ultimately returning to the Pacific in July 1930. I feel like the scouting fleet was just waiting for us to be like, hey, Cuba, we're like serious now. Like, you belong to us. The Oklahoma would remain in regular fleet operations until 1936. In the summer of 1936, she carries a group of midshipmen on a European tour. So what you're seeing here is, age is starting to catch up. She's still a competent vessel. It's a great training vessel. Not necessarily like the first vessel you would put into combat, because by now you've got things like the fast battleships. The North Carolina class exists. Things like that. They may not be built yet, but they're coming along quickly. Like the idea of the slow big gun dreadnought is quickly vanishing. Mm-hmm. But she's still very useful for training, and that's kind of what this trip is. It's supposed to serve as training for officers, especially your younger officers, and it also allows for like goodwill visits to various ports.
Are there ill will visits to foreign ports? I guess you could say like Perry. Yeah, Perry entering Japan is like an ill will visit.
Yeah, it's happened. I'd say.
Or like the Spanish fleet showing up in Chile and Peru in the episode we did about the tornado. That I guess was a bad will.
I would say the ending of Apocalypto, not a goodwill visit.
I guess now that I think of it, most naval appearances in a foreign country are probably ill will visits.
Especially if it's a surprise. So this cruise along the European coast would be interrupted by a little thing called the Spanish Civil War. Fortunately, she was in the area and she's able to help out a little bit. She would arrive off of Bilbao on July 24th, 1936. From there, she would evacuate American citizens along with other refugees and take them to Gibraltar.
I guess it's lucky because Bilbao falls to the nationalists fairly early in the war, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like this is very much like they happened to be there and got told like, hey, got real.
Yeah, especially because like the bombing of Guernica happens in the nationalist push to capture Bilbao in the Basque country. So yeah, that is lucky. I guess anyone you can get out of that is good.
After doing this, she would make her way back to Norfolk, Virginia, arriving on September 11th, and ultimately making her way back to the Pacific, arriving in October. The next 4 years found the Oklahoma as part of the general operations of the American Pacific Fleet. Again, she's not like a frontline battleship at this point, but she's still a very important part of the American fleet. She would be based out of Pearl Harbor and would only visit the mainland a couple of times in the interim here. Once is to have anti-aircraft guns added, and a second time is to have armor replaced in 1941. This actually brings us to that 1941 visit that while returning to Hawaii in August of 1941, the Oklahoma is actually caught in a really severe storm. One man is white squalled overboard, and 3 others are hospitalized. So, not great. Like, probably sailed directly through a hurricane or something along those lines.
Should have been on a line. The captain of the Oklahoma is like, well, at least this is the only guy we'll probably lose this year, at least.
The next morning, it becomes apparent that the storm has broken the starboard propeller shaft, and they have to stop and evaluate the damage, and the decision's made that they need to return to San Francisco. It's the only place that has adequate repair facilities. This would put her in dry dock in San Francisco until October 1941. I feel like, you know, those like seconds to disaster movies where like the scary music plays and it shows the clock.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like that's what we're doing here with,
especially because she like almost is spared. Like, let's say she had more serious damage and she had to return to San Francisco for longer.
Mm-hmm. So by October 1941, she's ready to go back to Hawaii. This may seem like a lot of work. Like, we've established this is an old vessel, and it seems like we're putting a lot of time and effort into maintaining her. But this is a result of the Washington Naval Treaty. It wasn't as simple as the U.S. just building another battleship to replace Oklahoma and to be in compliance with the treaty. That meant that repair was really the only option, even though the vessel was scheduled to be retired in May of 1942.
So is this because she was already built at the time of the Naval Treaty? And so, like, if a ship with similar specs and armament would that have been in violation of the Naval Treaty if she was new built?
I think the thing is, like, you wouldn't have built a ship to those specs in 1941. Okay. You would have built an Iowa or a North Carolina
a faster, bigger, better battleship.
And there's tonnage limits that go into that, and I mean, soon it just won't matter anymore.
Right.
I did think that was interesting that the ship was scheduled to be retired in May of 1942. Like, that tells you that, like, how old some of these were. Like, these weren't, again, these are not frontline vessels anymore.
Yeah, and it really highlights the sort of like how Pearl Harbor, in a sense, backfires on the Japanese, because, you know, not getting the carriers, all you've done now is cut a lot of the fat off of this Navy, and you've made it a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the human loss,
right?
I mean,
like, and obviously there's the morale, there's the emotional toll of this horrific attack. You know, it's the worst attack on American soil until 9/11. So yeah, there's that. Of course, it's not like Pearl Harbor was nothing, especially to the general public. But yeah, from a cruel, cold naval perspective, it's like all you've done here is rid us of some ships that were about to get retired anyway.
So we are to the day. We are there. We are at December 7th, 1941.
All right.
The Oklahoma finds itself moored at berth Fox 5 on Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor. She's on the outboard position next to the USS Maryland. That's a Colorado-class battleship. So pretty contemporary. Nothing too different there. I think I gotta look. I think the Colorado class is also a dreadnought style.
I would say don't waste your time. No one cares, but there probably is one person who cares, and they care a lot.
It is, yeah. The Maryland is also she's slightly newer, but yeah, she is the dreadnought style.
Being in a place called Battleship Row sounds like a pretty safe place.
Yeah, you stack them all up right there. So the Oklahoma is among the first to be targeted in the attacks. I think some of that's just due to her position of where she is on Battleship Row. She seems very accessible.
In a row of battleships?
Yeah, and just in a row. I mean, it is one of those things where, like, I mean, I know you have to aim, but, like, also just put it in that direction and, like, see what happens, right? She's targeted by torpedo bomber flights from Akagi and Kaga. These groups are able to score 3 hits pretty quickly. The first and second torpedoes struck within seconds of each other. I've got the time at 7:50 in most of the sources. A couple sources, I think, said 7:53. I don't know that it truly matters that much, but, you know, early. This is towards the beginning of the strikes. The torpedoes would strike 20 feet below the waterline between the smokestack and the main mast. This blew away a large part of her torpedo bulge, and oil began to spill from her fuel holds. However, the hull did remain intact. So that torpedo bulge initially does its job for those first 2 torpedoes.
It's the third one that gets you?
Like baseball.
So I was reading a bit about this just from some of the books I had sitting around in the aforementioned general nonfiction section. And one of the books I have is The Japanese Navy in World War II, in the words of former Japanese naval officers. So, of course, the lead up to and the attack on Pearl Harbor occupy the first, couple chapters of it. And Captain Mitsuo Fuchida's account is part of this. He was flying from the Akagi, and he's an overall, like, he's the on-scene commander of the Japanese planes attacking Pearl Harbor. And of course, his account provides some interesting detail from the quote, other side of the attack. And what I thought was interesting is that despite these multiple successful torpedo hits in just this first run, torpedoes weren't even included in Fuchida's original plan for the attack.
Interesting.
So he's told in late September about this attack and where they're going to attack. And he's essentially tasked with, okay, figure it out, submit a plan. I think he reports directly to Minoru Genda, but he's tasked with this, and he doesn't even think to include torpedoes because he's thinking Pearl Harbor, it's too shallow, it's too narrow. Torpedoes aren't going to be very useful.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's a quote from Fuchida's account. The more I heard about the plan, the more astonishing it seemed. Genda kept urging that torpedoes be used against ships in Pearl Harbor, a feat that seemed next to impossible in view of the water depth of only 12 meters, and the harbor's width of not more than 500 meters. When I pointed this out, Genda merely grew more determined, insisting that if we could launch torpedoes, they would not be expected, adding to the surprise of the attack and multiplying its effectiveness. This line of argument won me over, and despite the technical difficulties that would have to be overcome, I agreed to include torpedoes in our attack plans. So Fuchida's convinced to include these, and as we see, it's pretty effective.
Yeah, I can see where the temptation to bomb is, though, with them all being stacked up in Battleship Row. Like, you just think, how can you miss, right? But I also see that, like, the torpedoes are a much more sure way of sinking these vessels, whereas you can drop bombs on a battleship all day and it might not sink.
So Fuchida also, he mentions the challenge of having to hastily train these pilots on shallow water torpedo attacks without actually revealing what their target was going to be. So, like, trying to sort of dance around, okay, we are going to hit some closely packed vessels in very shallow, very narrow conditions. And then hoping that basically none of the pilots actually guess, this sounds like Pearl Harbor. Are we attacking Pearl Harbor? I imagine him finally revealing it. He's like, okay, men, the target is Pearl Harbor. And them all being like, oh, yeah, wow. Surprise.
Yeah.
So this technical challenge was actually addressed through the addition of extra fins onto the torpedoes.
Interesting.
Which seemed to have worked. I don't know exactly what the physics of that was, but they tweaked the fins on these torpedoes so that they would, I think, not dive as deep when they were initially dropped.
Yeah, I'm assuming it has to do with, like, the drop depth once it's released, of it just popping up quicker.
And then another interesting detail, one last thing from Fuchida here, is actually how he navigated the final stretch of the approach to Pearl Harbor. Kind of like you said with the ships, none of these Japanese attack planes, none of them have, like, obviously none of them have like radar or like homing devices on them. So he has to get creative with how he's actually going to make this final approach to Pearl Harbor. And he writes, the speedometer indicated 125 knots, and we were favored by a tailwind. At 700, I figured that we should reach Oahu in less than an hour. But flying over the clouds, we could not see the surface of the water and consequently had no check on our drift. I switched on the radio direction finder to tune in the Honolulu radio station, and soon picked up some light music. By turning the antenna, I found the exact direction from which the broadcast was coming, and corrected our course, which had been 5 degrees off.
Imagine being guided in by, like, some easy listening, like, jazz.
Some big band music. I guess I don't know what would have been on the radio at the time.
It does have to be a little surreal flying, like, in the pre-dawn, listening to pop music of the day, like, knowing what you're about to go do.
And actually, it wasn't just the direction that the radio helped him find. In addition to that, Fuchida also, he received an update on the weather. So the winds, visibility, and cloud cover on the island, that allowed him to make some final tweaks in his attack plan. And it ended up being, this is like literally perfect for, I think he sort of switches to his plan B approach based on what he hears about the winds and the cloud cover. And he gets that because he's tuned into this Honolulu radio station. I just thought that was a fun little detail of the attack that I had never heard before.
That's the kind of stuff that is interesting in these. So bringing it back to the attack as it's unfolding on the Oklahoma. Around 80 sailors actually attempt to man the anti-aircraft guns on board. However, these guns are inoperable at the moment as the firing locks are stored in the armory. Anytime you hear about something going on in a military base, like a shooting or some sort of surprise attack, a lot of times you think like, well, wow, everyone has a gun. Like this must be easy, but not really. Like ammo and
you don't really carry those around with you.
Yeah, like ammo and guns are like highly regulated in these situations. And I mean, for a peacetime Navy, there's really no reason that you should be able to blast away with an AA gun randomly at port tied up. However, most men would still man their battle stations that were below deck or seek shelter. That's kind of the standard operating procedure for an aerial attack at this time, is that like you are pretty limited in how you can respond. So best to stay below deck. This brings us to the third torpedo that struck at 8 a.m. It would actually, obviously the Japanese are doing it with intent. There's probably a little bit of luck here. It strikes the exact same place that the first two torpedoes did. That renders that bulge null and void.
Like the first two kind of did their job. They cleared out that area.
So this would penetrate the hull and destroy a fuel bunker, which would rupture. And this pretty much just destroys all access to the two forward boiler rooms. It's a pretty catastrophic shot, this third one. The Oklahoma had already begun to list heavily to port when two additional torpedoes struck the vessel. At that point, it's probably overkill even, but you got to make sure if you're the Japanese. So, you're up to 5 torpedoes now into this one vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as men are trying to escape, you're still being strafed by a Japanese aircraft. All of the things that you would expect.
No fair.
I think you have a little bit more here from a Japanese source.
Yeah, Fuchida, he talks about his group's secondary runs over Battleship Row. And actually, kind of in general, his account is really interesting reading the almost leisurely way that Fuchida, as the aerial commander, is able to sort of just circle around at will and direct people where he wants them to go. There's really no rush. It seems like they feel very confident in their aerial supremacy. There's really no threat of American planes. The anti-aircraft fire is fairly sporadic and not really concentrated. And so he really just kind of able to sort of sit back and observe what is going on here. And so he writes, "My group now entered on a bombing course again. Studying Battleship Row through binoculars, I saw that the big explosion had been on the Arizona. She was still flaming fiercely, and her smoke was covering the Nevada, the target of my group. Since the heavy smoke would hinder our bomber accuracy, I looked for some other ship to attack."
The Tennessee, third in the left row, was already on fire. The next in the row was the Maryland, which had not yet been attacked. From a great altitude, near misses are much more obvious than direct hits, because they create wave rings in the water that are plain to see. Observing only 2 such rings, plus 2 tiny flashes, I shouted 2 hits and rose from the floor of the plane.
The minute flashes were the only evidence we had of hits at that time, but I felt sure that they had done considerable damage. I ordered the bombers that had completed their runs to return to the carriers, but my own plane remained over Pearl Harbor to observe our successes and conduct operations still in progress.
Yeah, that is crazy how unopposed it is.
Kind of in the lead up to it, you can obviously see the amount of planning that goes into this, but they have multiple signals that they're going to share, back to the fleet to basically indicate, either say attack called off, or attack made with resistance, or successful surprise attack achieved. And that's where the Tora comes from. That is the code to say back, yes, this was a total surprise attack. And so here, he's making these decisions, and he's entrusted with making these decisions in the moment of, where's he going to redirect his attack based on the situation. So his account's really interesting to see what that actually looks like.
So in less than 12 minutes, the Oklahoma rolled over, and she only stopped when her mast touched the bottom, with her starboard side out of the water. I read in some of my sources it's possible that the Oklahoma took as many as 8 torpedoes. I think some of the Japanese sources say it could have been as many as 12.
Fuchida, he doesn't necessarily claim 12, but he writes that 12 were reported hit on the Oklahoma. So, of course, these could be like multiple reports reporting the same impact as 2 different impacts. It's possible. But we know that, the Oklahoma took a lot of torpedoes.
I think it's interesting here that some of the men on deck are actually able to make their way over to the Maryland, because as the Japanese pilot, talks about, like, the Maryland hasn't been hit in all of this. They're actually able to join some of the Maryland crews on her AA guns and are able to provide a little bit of resistance.
Is the Maryland on the island side of...
I believe she's on the
Oklahoma?
interior side.
She's inside the Oklahoma, so she's not probably as exposed.
I mean, I guess you could say she's somewhat protected from torpedoes in that sense. Yeah, like she's some of the crew is able to make her way over there. In total, 429 men would die aboard the Oklahoma. And actually, it's interesting. One of the most famous and notable here is Father Alois Schmidt. He's actually the first chaplain of any faith to be killed in World War II on the American side, since it just started. They would actually name a destroyer, I think, after him, which is somewhat ironic to name a destroyer after a chaplain. You'd think you'd maybe go like resupply vessel or hospital ship. So we haven't talked about the captain of the Oklahoma at this time. And that is a man named Captain Howard D. Bode. He actually had just finished his watch at 7:30 that morning, and he was aboard the Maryland when the Oklahoma capsized. He, obviously, really through no fault of his own, couldn't exactly get back over to the Oklahoma, and his watch had been completed. But I would imagine that has to gnaw at you a little bit, that you weren't there. Even if you probably weren't going to make it off, like you weren't there with your men. He would actually later be given command of the destroyer USS Chicago, and he would take part in various operations, including the Battle of Savo Island. Do you know, is that anything that's been mentioned in the Tall book?
I don't remember the close details, but I know that's part of Guadalcanal.
So
that's
apparently
of
the USS Chicago took some hits and quite a bit of damage in that, and he kind of took the blame for that as well through some of his actions. And he would actually end up shooting himself and committing suicide in the aftermath of that. And I think immediately following this battle of the Savo Island. So he definitely, I think, had a lot of baggage with him as far as being a commander in the Navy.
Well, that is very Japanese coded.
It is. It quickly became apparent, however, in the moment here at Pearl Harbor, that there's men trapped in the capsized hull. And I think this is probably one of the most famous stories of the Oklahoma and just of Pearl Harbor in general, is the tapping.
Yeah, and again, that's something that I would have thought was the Arizona, but as we've established, there's not much left of the Arizona to tap on.
Yeah, I think in some kind of ironic way, despite the Arizona being such a tragedy, a lot of those guys were lucky that it was just over.
That's true.
From visiting Pearl Harbor and stuff, they definitely talk about the rescue operations and things that went on. And some of that sounds truly like a horror movie, essentially the Poseidon Adventure, but worse. So rescue efforts actually begin as Japanese planes are still in the air. There's a pretty quick response from. Fortunately, it is a major naval base. You have a lot of people who have a unique set of skills that are very attuned to cutting and entering capsized hulls. One of these men who led the response was Julio de Castro. He's a Hawaiian civilian worker. He would organize a team of men who, shipyard workers, things like that. And they were able to save 32 sailors that were trapped in the hull. This is a pretty delicate process, however, though, Because anytime you're cutting a hole, you're potentially destroying an air pocket and causing it to collapse.
I imagine there's like fumes and
there's fuel and oil in the water. There's fumes. Not something you want to take a torch near necessarily. Like, they had to be very deliberate and careful, but also exceptionally quick, in doing these things. While the Arizona is the ship, obviously that's most remembered from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Ian Toll writes in Pacific Crucible about the psychological effect the loss of the Oklahoma had at the time.
As terrible as the fate of the Arizona had been, many witnesses were even more shaken by the sight of the Oklahoma. After being hit by a barrage of aerial torpedoes, she'd listed to starboard and then rolled nearly vertical, leaving her gigantic steel hull pointed up to the sky and her superstructure buried in the soft mud at the bottom of the harbor. 3 generations of officers and enlisted men had been taught to believe that every battleship was a fortress, permanent and impregnable. For such a ship to roll over like a toy boat in a bathtub seemed ludicrous, almost inconceivable. But there she was. Gunner's Mate 3rd Class George E. Waller of the Maryland recalled, "We'd been told all our lives that you couldn't sink a battleship, and then to see one go upside down, it was heartbreaking."
I think you're seeing the final fulfillment of Billy Mitchell's prophecies at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That the Navy, by its nature, is a fairly conservative organization. They don't want to admit that air power can do this, and it's no longer deniable that you have to have support against air power to be a successful Navy.
I think that quote also really hammers home what we talked about before. The visuals are important when it comes to receiving messages like this. Like, yeah, the Arizona is obliterated and most people who were on her are killed, but that doesn't leave much to look at.
Right.
Whereas the Oklahoma is still capsized, still there, when the top brass people are coming into Pearl Harbor, a week or two later, they can still see the Oklahoma there.
And I think that's where that picture I shared with you and we can share on social media, that to me is why I think when I think of Pearl Harbor, I think of that, her hull up in the air like that with people walking around on it, working to cut into it. That is, I think that is the poster of Pearl Harbor by a large degree, especially in the immediate aftermath of it. That, like you said, you can't ignore it. It's there. It's interesting that even these older battleships are still thought as impregnable. That, they might not be as fast or have as much armor, but you still can't just sink it with an airplane. And that, just totally out the window at this point. There are 2 Medal of Honor recipients that day. And we'll just read one of these. I'll read one of the citations. But the 2 men are Francis C. Flaherty of Charlotte, Michigan. His remains would be ID'd on November 1st, 2019.
Oh, wow. So they're still working at...
There's a huge forensic project with the Oklahoma that goes on for years.
So does this mean... So was that Medal of Honor awarded previously, or was it awarded at the time that his...
It was awarded at the time.
Oh, okay.
The second one is James R. Ward from Springfield, Ohio, just down the road. And his remains were ID'd on August 19th, 2021. I actually remember that being in the local paper. And their citations are identical if you want to go ahead and read one of those.
For conspicuous devotion to duty and extraordinary courage and complete disregard of his own life, above and beyond the call of duty, during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. When it was seen that the USS Oklahoma was going to capsize and the order was given to abandon ship, Ensign Flaherty remained in a turret, holding a flashlight, so the remainder of the turret crew could see to escape, thereby sacrificing his own life.
I think it's interesting that they're written up identical to each other. Obviously, I think anytime there's a national tragedy, you obviously have to look for, I guess you'd call it a bright spot and celebrate it. So I guess that's what's going on here. Either way, it's still pretty brave to not evacuate a turret when you're capsizing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've seen bravery like that with other stories where you have, whether it's someone staying behind to hold open a hatch or something so people can escape. I know we've seen that on some occasions.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the Medal of Honor can be it's not always charging a machine gun nest with a bayonet. So I thought that was interesting. It's also interesting with the local Ohio connection there for James R. Ward. Like I said, I definitely remember that being in the news when his remains were identified. It's a really cool DNA project that they've done for the Oklahoma.
Mm.
I think they've identified all, but I think I saw 30 or 40 people. So that's pretty cool, considering.
It's a big job. Yeah.
So, salvage. In 1942, the decision is made to salvage the Oklahoma. So part of this is because she's deemed to be a navigational hazard as she's rolled into the main channel. And part of it is we're in the middle of a war.
It's not really her fault.
Yeah, right. But also there are some salvageable things on there that we need. This job would begin on July 15th, 1942, under the command of Captain F.H. Whitaker and a team from the Pearl Harbor Navy shipyard.
Like all of the low background steel that she has.
Yeah.
Which we don't know we'll need yet.
Yeah, we don't know that we'll need it, but we want it. So the prep work for the vessel took about 8 months. Air is pumped in to the interior chamber and improvised airlocks are created. Water was forced out of the holes left from the torpedoes. And they actually use coral, soil, and rock to be placed in front of her bow, and that's to prevent her from slipping further into the channel. At that point, 2 barges are placed on either side of the hull, and that's to control the rise of the vessel. With that done, 21 derricks were attached to the upturned hull, and these are each connected to a winch on shore.
We're not supposed to call them that anymore.
The righting operation began on March 8th, 1943, and was completed on June 16th, 1943. So it takes quite a while just to even get the capsized hull turned over. With the hull righted, cofferdams are built around it, and that allows them to patch up her hull and at least get the vessel refloated. She's not seaworthy, but she can float to a dry dock where she's put on December 28th. They don't really get into it in any of the sources I've seen, but I cannot imagine what kind of hell was in that ship when you had to go through the hull after it was righted and drained. That's something out of nightmares.
Yeah, a lot of remains.
I mean, I think we talk about with the seawall and stuff and diving to try to find bodies and things like that, but just imagine it drained out and just sitting there waiting for you like that. Probably some memories that lasted a lifetime for some people. So some of the targets of the salvage are her main guns, her machinery, remaining ammo, and even her canned food stores. We're in the middle of a war. We're reusing everything we can reuse.
The seal's still good.
Those Vienna sausages are fine. You will eat them.
I wonder if anyone knew they were eating.
They probably didn't tell anybody.
Tinned meat off of the Oklahoma.
So the worst of her hull damage was repaired, and now that she's watertight, she in theory can sail somewhere.
Get back in there, soldier.
So the Oklahoma is decommissioned on September 1st, 1944. The Navy is just done with it. They know she's too old to return to service, even in a situation like World War II.
Well, and at this point, September 1944, it's we're not.
Yeah, we know. We're not really turned the tide.
We're not really desperate for a ship as old as this one.
Not when you have the Iowa class operating the way that it is and things like that. So at auction, there was an auction held at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on November 26, 1946, and that's for the salvage rights to the vessel. So the vessel's not there at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. That's just where the auction is held. They're not towing her all the way to New York from Pearl Harbor. This auction is won by Moore Dry Dock of Oakland, California, for a winning bid of $46,127. A lot less than the $6 million it cost to build her.
Yeah.
In May of 1947, 2 tugs begin to move the hull of the Oklahoma from Pearl Harbor to San Francisco Bay. She's actually due to arrive on Memorial Day, and there's a delegation from Oklahoma, including Governor Roy J. Turner. They plan to greet the vessel, pay their final respects, the kind of pomp and circumstances you would expect. or something like that. However, on May 17th, nearly 500 miles from Hawaii, the convoy encounters a strong storm. Something about the Oklahoma and catching a storm, like in that area. The tug Hercules is one of the two that, is towing her, and they light her up with her spotlight in the dark, and it immediately becomes clear that the Oklahoma has a substantial list. The crew radios Pearl, and they're instructed to return back to the Navy Yard there. Suddenly, however, after reporting this...
Wait, with the Oklahoma, right?
Yes, they are supposed to turn around and bring the Oklahoma. Suddenly, after, talking this all out, the Hercules is pulled backwards. They end up being pulled past the other tug, the Monarch, which itself is being dragged backwards at nearly 15 knots. That's not good.
Oh,
Oklahoma is sinking.
Doing well.
Oklahoma is going down directly where she is. She's actually pulling so hard that it swamps the sterns of both tugs as they try to pull against her. Both captains quickly decide to loosen their cable drums, which are connected to 1,400-foot lines. The Monarch's played out really quick and released like it was supposed to. However, the Hercules held on longer and did not immediately release. This caused the Hercules to bob up and down like a cork when it finally did. That has to be something, like feeling your ship being pulled down by the hulk of an old battleship.
This is flashbacks to like the Essex or whaling ones, talking about the whale, being stuck the harpoon and deciding when to cut the line.
Yeah, I mean, literally it is. They're able to cut it, but like I said, they are bobbing all over the place. There's water all over the place. It's a scary moment in a storm.
Yeah.
And with this, the Oklahoma reached her final resting place on the bottom of the Pacific. Currently, that resting place is unknown.
What? We don't know where the Oklahoma is?
No, she's somewhere in the Pacific. I think what's interesting is, and maybe one of the reasons why we don't, I guess, look as much, is that it's just the hull.
Yeah,
there is it's not a war grave or anything like that.
Right.
It is just a cleaned out hull of a battleship.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, I guess. Yeah, it's not that important.
And that is the story of the USS Oklahoma.
All right. I know, I don't even know if we still do this. So, the Navy, I imagine with a ship like the Oklahoma, the Arizona, does the Navy retire those names? Is there?
Well, I know there's a USS Oklahoma City. But not an Oklahoma. I don't think there's.
I assume they would never make another USS Arizona.
There is a sub Oklahoma. I think it's a Virginia class attack submarine. I don't know about Arizona though. Let's see.
Seems wrong.
That might be retired Jersey. Oh no, there is a Virginia class USS Arizona as well.
Is that a submarine?
Yeah.
Well, I guess
she will be the first vessel since the battleship to carry the name when she's.
Okay.
I don't believe it's commissioned yet. It is under construction, but it will be the
I guess
first one.
A different type of vessel kind of makes sense. It's like a number being retired on one team, but not another.
The sponsor for the new USS Arizona is Nikki Stratton, who is the granddaughter of Donald Stratton, who died aboard the Arizona.
Huh.
Or no, he survived the Arizona. Sorry, he died in 2020 at 97.
Oh.
So yeah, that is the story of the Oklahoma. Kind of the other big battleship that was there at Pearl Harbor, I guess, as far as stories go.
Yeah, I learned a lot from this one. Mainly stuff that I thought was the Arizona is actually the Oklahoma.
So. I think for anyone, if you've been to Pearl Harbor or if you're ever going to go, going out to the Arizona is probably one of the cool or interesting is not the right word. It truly
is sick nasty.
It's just an experience. It is a truly unique experience being out there on the Arizona. You can see the Missouri from there. It actually, like where the Missouri is at is basically where the Oklahoma was that day. So it is kind of cool that you can see where the history happened quite literally.
With the Missouri, the history being the plot of Under Siege.
It is kind of funny that we parked the Missouri like literally a couple hundred yards away from the Arizona to kind of be like first and last in the Pacific.
The Missouri was that the one where the surrender was signed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to go on board the Missouri when we were there that day. We were kind of in a time crunch. That is one thing I wish that I had been able to do. But I will say, like, yeah, going out to visit the Arizona Memorial it's a pretty interesting experience. Mainly because like you have to take a boat to even get out there, and there is like such a limited number of people in there at one point. I also really like that it's actual Navy people that take you out there, and they're pretty much like, hey, like this is a grave. You will be quiet.
This isn't for your Instagram or your
That's pretty much
MySpace.
That's pretty much what they tell you is like you can take your pictures, but like
your Zanga.
But yeah, it's a very interesting experience if you're interested in this stuff. If you get the chance to visit Pearl Harbor, definitely do it. I know you've alluded to it a little bit. Did you want to say anything more about our upcoming episode?
Our upcoming episode has been teased a bit. I'm still not going to announce exactly what it is. Sharp-eyed followers on social media probably already know. We've like made references to it. It is going to be our first Arctic episode. That's kind of the Arctic is interesting because a lot of them are, in the technical sense of the word, maritime disasters, because many of them do involve a ship being lost or destroyed. But there's so many different elements compared to kind of your standard shipwreck. So obviously we haven't tackled one before, but we do have a lot of fans and followers who are also very interested in Arctic or polar exploration. And we're both somewhat interested in it. We not as deep into that world as some of, say, Terror Twitter is. But we have a multiple part episode that will also have a bonus episode. And we have a really fun guest coming on for that one to bring a bit more of an expert eye to the story. So yeah, I'm really excited. We are going to record that one next week. I think the end of next week. And we really look forward to that one, announcing all that. We also have some bonus episodes we need to get out for this cycle. But aside from that, yeah, just final reminder, go listen to us on We Always Lie to Strangers, so you can learn about the Great Cobra Scare of 1953.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you soon.